You know, there's just something about watching a fighting anime that makes you want to get off your couch and go kick some ass. Call it childish or whatever, but I'm sure most of us can relate to watching Dragon Ball Z as a kid and then wanting to go train as if you were stuck in the hyperbolic time chamber. Heck, there are even some professional athletes who take inspiration from anime. I mean, just look at the UFC middleweight champ, Israel Adesanya. But as I've gotten older, I've been finding it increasingly hard to find good fighting anime. That's why I turned to manga, more specifically, martial arts manga. They have a sense of realism to them due to their incorporation of real-life fighting styles, but they also have a touch of fantasy and supernaturalism that makes reading manga fun in the first place. That's why today, I've decided to bless your lives with 5 martial arts manga/manhwas that I think everyone should read. Now these 5 are going to be in no particular order, and they're going to range from down-to-the-earth realism to balls-to-the-wall crazy. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so I'm going to try to keep this one short. If you are familiar with my channel at all, then you know how crazy obsessed I am with Kengan Ashura/Omega. It's probably what I look forward to reading the most each week, and I find myself constantly feeding for more. But for those of you who are not familiar with this manga, imagine a world where multi-billion-dollar companies gamble their corporate rights in underground gladiator fights known as Kengan matches. I'm talking about some big boy companies such as McDonald's, Nintendo, and the nightly leisure ones. The CEOs of these companies are part of a secret underground group known as the Kengan Association, and they sit in combands to fight on their behalf. The story follows Tokudo Oma, your typical hot-headed battle-crazed MC, and his quest for revenge upon the man who killed his master. Along the way, he meets Yamashita Kazuwa, a spineless middle-aged working man at his wit's end. Together, the two enter what is known as the Kengan Annihilation Tournament, which is a major tournament where all the world's best fighters gather to determine who will be the next Kengan chairman. A majority of this series is centered around this one big tournament, and every chapter is filled with some of the most action-packed fight scenes that I've seen in any anime or manga. I wouldn't say that Oma's quest for revenge is a subplot, but it definitely wasn't on the forefront of my mind when I was reading through the series. Admittedly, the world of Kengan Ashura is way more fleshed out in the sequel, but I feel as though most people read the original series for the shot of testosterone that they would get after reading every chapter. The series has a wide roster of characters, as there are 32 combatants who enter the tournament, and they all have their own unique fighting style that's based off of a real-life martial art. And that's where the series really hooked me. The choreography of the fights in Kengan Ashura is impeccable. Since the author seems to be a huge MMA fan, he does his fights justice by displaying practical techniques that real fighters would use, such as the triangle choke, the jab, and the blast double leg. Sure, there are some fights and techniques that are totally absurd, but those moments, coupled with the realistic fighting styles, is what makes the series great. If you want a more in-depth review of why you should read Kengan Ashura, then watch my video here. Otherwise, pick up this manga and join me on my journey reading it week by week. Before I introduce the next series, I just want to say, please excuse any mispronunciation that I may make regarding the name of characters and such. And this actually goes for the rest of the series that I will be talking about as well. The Breaker is what introduced me to the world of manhwa, and it made me realize that some Korean comics are as good as their Japanese counterparts. The story follows Shiwon-yi, a timid high school boy who is a constant target for the school bullies. One day after getting beaten up, he runs into the new homeroom teacher, Han Chun-woo. But instead of saving our bully protagonist, Chun-woo just asked him for directions. It isn't until later, when our protagonist witnesses Chun-woo defeat the bullies on an entirely separate occasion, does he realize that his teacher is actually a martial arts master. But only after a series of events that involve Shiwon falling off a building here and jumping off a bridge there, is he able to convince Chun-woo to be his master. It's your typical story of where the weak bully protagonist meets a super strong badass mentor and eventually becomes badass himself. It may sound like an overused trope, but goddamn does this series do it well. You see, much of the story revolves around the Miram and those who inhabit it. The word Miram is used to describe the secret martial arts world. Think of it as the Illuminati but for martial artists. They have their own set of rules that they must abide to, their own government, and their own internal conflicts. And as we see Shiwon get more and more roped in, the more we see him develop as a character. The weak, pathetic boy who couldn't defend himself in the beginning of the series becomes someone you literally have to kill in order to make surrender. Honestly, if you looked up the word persistence in some weird dictionary that had pictures of fictional Asian characters, you would see a picture of Shiwon, and Guts from Berserk. The fighting in The Breaker definitely takes a much more supernatural approach, as most of the combatants in this world rely on their inner ki channels in order to fight. Ki is what separates normal people from those involved with the Miram. It allows them to do superhuman feats such as creating after images or being able to throw punches that are strong enough to break reinforced glass. However, despite its supernatural aspects, the series does put an emphasis on what it means to be a real martial artist. It tells the story of a boy who's trying to better himself through martial arts, and it has themes such as only fight those who are strong enough to fight back. And oh my god, the art is amazing. Like seriously, this series has some of the most breathtaking panels that I've ever laid my eyes on. The amount of time and effort it must have taken to draw some of these scenes is already enough to garner my respect. The next series that I'm going to talk about is actually the one that helped me get over the fact that I finished The Breaker. It's another manhwa and goes by the name of Veritas, which is a Latin word for truth. Unlike the timid Shiwun, the main character of Veritas is a total a-hole and he knows it. Gang Ruyang is a mouthy, disrespectful high school student whose only talent in life is fighting. But similar to Shiwun, Gang Ruyang isn't someone who likes to pick on the weak. He's only interested in fighting those who are strong. The story starts off the same as The Breaker in the sense that Gang Ruyang is introduced after getting beaten up by a bunch of guys. As he starts to believe that it's impossible for a singular person to be able to defeat a group of multiple opponents, lo and behold, someone appears and proceeds to beat up said group. This mysterious man goes by the name of Lightning Tiger, and similar to Han Chun-woo from The Breaker, he makes Gang Ruyang go through a bunch of trials before taking him on as a student. After training Gang Ruyang for a few months, Lightning Tiger states that he has to go fight some great evil and dips. 1 year after that, a group of mysterious men appeared before Gang Ruyang, revealing to him that his master has died and that he's been invited to attend a school where other martial artists like him go to further develop their skills. Now motivated by both the desire to get stronger and the need to unravel his master's death, Gang Ruyang accepts the invitation and enrolls himself in said school. Now this manhwa takes the fantasy aspect to the extreme, even more so than The Breaker. You have some guys that can shoot down lightning, some that can make fireballs, and some that can destroy whole buildings, all thanks to their inner ki. But the thing I like most about this series is that our protagonist is mostly sealed off from these overpowered techniques. Because he didn't formally start training martial arts until he was already in his late teens, most of his ki channels were already sealed off. This means that he has to make his way through fights with his limited amount of ki and his bare knuckle fighting skills that he's accumulated over his years of street fighting. It's amusing to see how he's able to drag these stuck up, dignified martial artists into the type of dogfight you would see on the streets. But this fighting style is totally reflective of the brash and crude type of person that Gang Ruyang is. He actually reminds me a lot of my all-time favorite anime character, Yusuke Urameshi. Remember that scene when Yusuke flipped off the girl in front of a whole crowd of demons? Well yeah, Gang Ruyang gives off that type of energy throughout the whole series. The series also has a diverse cast of characters in the form of the school student body. Most of them have their own backstory and their own style of fighting that is reflective of their personality. It's easy to get invested into the characters as we follow them along their journey in discovering their own Veritas. Rikudo is probably going to be the most tragic and depressing series on this list. The story opens up with Kyosuke Tokorozawa, an ex-boxing champ and current Yakuza member, knocking down the door of the Azami household in order to collect some debts. But when he opens the door, he finds his target hanging from the ceiling after committing suicide. Now if that wasn't already morbid enough, Tokorozawa also finds the son of his target hitting his corpse as if it was a punching bag. This young boy is our protagonist, Riku Azami. Turns out that Riku had been enduring his father's abuse for years, and just once he wanted to pay him back. Then in a very pragmatic fashion, Tokorozawa teaches Riku how to properly punch. As he leaves the house, he tells Riku to take a good look at his father and to remember, this is what a loser looks like. The punches that Riku learned comes in handy very quickly because not long after moving in with his drug addict mother, he had to defend himself from her abusive boyfriend. Riku realized that it was in a kill or be killed situation and they had to save himself because no one else was going to. He ended up stunning his attacker with a punch that Tokorozawa taught him and then proceeded to kill him with an ashtray. I know that sounded like a lot, but that all happens within the first chapter, and Riku killing his attacker is actually a major driving point in the story. It's something that he has to carry with him for the rest of his life, and we see how murder affects the way he thinks, the way people see him, and the way he fights. Very much like the plot, the fights in Rikudo are much more realistic than your typical martial arts manga. You can expect to see some beautifully drawn punches and amazing boxing matches as we follow Riku on his way in capturing the OPBF lightweight title. I would say the boxing in this manga is a lot more grounded than something like Hajime no Ippo. Instead of using exaggerated and outdated moves like the Dempsey roll, the author chooses to focus on fundamental techniques like the jab and the straight cross. If you're a boxing fan, you can also expect to see a lot of references to real-life boxers like Prince Nassim and Marcos Maidana. I think my favorite part about this manga are the different types of opponents that Riku encounters. He faces off against opponents from different walks of life, yet almost none of them seem as wicked as you would imagine an antagonist would be. He fights against a brawler, a prodigy, and a man with nothing else to lose, just like him. But they all have their own reason for fighting, and it's interesting to see how each fight acts as a catalyst for Riku's character development. Alright, so to end the video on a lighter note, the last series that I will be talking about is Gosu. Now I'm cheating a little bit here because it's neither a manga nor a manhwa, but actually a webtoon. If you're not familiar with what webtoons are, they're digital comics that are usually published by South Korea. A major difference between a webtoon and a traditional Korean manhwa is that webtoons are published in one long vertical strip so that it's easier to scroll down and read on one's phone. Another major difference is that they're usually done in full color as opposed to black and white. So if you ever wished that the manga or manhwa you were reading was more similar to anime, then I recommend you guys try a webtoon. So back to Gosu. The story introduces Doko Ryong, the Heavenly Destroyer. He was the strongest martial artist of his era and he ruled a vast majority of the land. However, his time as strongest had come to pass. He was betrayed and left for dead by his 4 students who all conspired together to assassinate him. But the Heavenly Destroyer survived and chose to take on one final disciple. He picked up a young boy, raised him in a dark cavern, and taught him all the techniques he learned over his life, all so he can exact his revenge. This young boy is our protagonist, and his name is Kengan. After his master passes away, Kengan steps out of the dark cavern and embarks on his journey for revenge. Now I know it sounds like your typical revenge story, but this is where Gosu gets interesting. You see, when our main character steps out into the open world, he quickly finds out that all 4 students have died due to internal fighting. This has become pretty public knowledge and only those living under a rock, or in this case, a cavern, would not know about it. So that brings up the question, what does Kengan do now? Gosu is an action-packed and hilarious martial arts story that follows Kengan through his daily life as a dumpling delivery boy. He always seems to run into trouble along his deliveries, and his unassuming plump figure makes it extremely funny every time he has to reveal his martial arts powers. The fights are incredibly well drawn and also super over the top. Kengan is ridiculously overpowered and the artist does a great job of showing the large-scale destruction caused by his ki attacks. As the story progresses and Kengan slowly gets drawn back into the world of martial arts, we see him run into some more difficult opponents which result in some immensely hyped battles. The series also has great comedic moments as well as some serious character development for our protagonist. Gosu is also connected to another one of the author's works, Yangbi the Invincible. It's not necessary to read Yangbi, but if you do, it will make reading Gosu that much more enjoyable. So that was my list of 5 martial arts manga/manhwas that I think should all be reading. There are a ton more series that I could talk about, so if you guys would like a part 2 to this video, then let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.